Good afternoon. My name's Damon McMurdo, and I'm here to show you how to multiply by 10, 100, and 1,000 very easily to save you from doing very much work. Let's start with a whole number. Let's start with the number. Let me find the correct marker. Let's start with the whole number 21. If I asked you what 21 times 10 was, you'd all know what 21 times 10 was, right? It equals 210. Well, with decimals, it's the same thing. Because if you think about it, 21 has a decimal point at the end. So if we're taking the number 21 with its decimal point, and we move the decimal point one place to the right, that makes it 210. Which is where we get it. If you multiply by 1,000, 3 to the right. 100, 2 to the right. You just move the decimal point to the right, the same as there are a number of zeros. Let's do a couple examples here. So you can see a couple examples here. Let's take the number 2 and 1900ths. 2 and 1900ths. If I'm going to multiply that by 1, obviously when you multiply a number by 1 it stays the same. It's going to be 2 and 1900ths. If I take 2 and 1900ths and I multiply it by 10, my decimal point goes one place to the right, and that equals 21 and 9/10. If I multiply 2 and 1900ths times 100, 2 zeros, and these are all multiples of 10, and if they have a 1 and then followed by zeros, you move the decimal point that many places. I'm trying to think of the word I was looking for and I can't think of it right now. 10, 100, 1,000. So this time, 2 zeros, I move the decimal point 2 places to the right. And you don't necessarily have to have this written down, but that's where it is. You need to know that it's there. If it's not written down, that's where it is. Now let's take that and multiply by 1,000. 2.19 times 1,000. 3 zeros, decimal point 3 times to the right. In order to do that, I have to add a 0. So this is going to be... So if you're multiplying by tens, hundreds, or thousands, 10, 100, or 1,000, then it's just a matter of moving the decimal point. Let's do one more. Because they're fun. Let's take 35.6 times 1 is obviously stays the same. If you multiply a number by 1, it stays the same. That's the multiplication property of 1. So that stays 35 and 6/10. 35 and 6/10 times 10 equals 356. I just moved the decimal point one place. 35 and 6/10 times 100. I have to move it 2 places, so I'm going to have to add a 0 at the end. And there's my decimal point. 35.6 times 1,000. I have to move this 3 places. 1, 2, 3, so I'm going to have to add 2 zeros at the end. Easy peasy, raw chicken squeezy. So that's multiplying by 10, 100, and 1,000. But let's look at multiplying by tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. So let's take the number Okay, so we're taking 67 and 43 hundredths. If we multiply that by 1, obviously it stays the same. Anytime you multiply a number by 1, it stays the same. If I multiply that by 1/10, this time the decimal point, since we're multiplying by less than 1, our number here is going to become smaller. So if I multiply by something less than 1, because if I multiply it by 1, it stays the same. So here I'm multiplying by less than 1. So this number has to become smaller. And if it's 1/10, you move it one place to the right. If we take the same number and multiply it by 1/100th, I bet you can guess what's going to happen. It's going to move two places to the right. And if we take the same number and multiply it by 1,000th, we move the decimal point 3 places to the right. So doing these is just a matter of moving the decimal point. If you're multiplying by 10, 100, or 1,000, the number's got to get bigger because you're multiplying by something greater than 1. If you multiply by 1, it stays the same. Multiply by a number bigger than 1, the number gets bigger. If you multiply by a number less than 1, your factor is going to become smaller. Let's look at one more. Let's look at 7,391. If I multiply it by 1, it stays the same. Anything multiplied by 1 remains that number. If I multiply by 1/10, it's less than 1, so it gets smaller. Where's my decimal point in this number? 7,391. Good, at the end. So I have to move it one place to the right, or to the left, if I'm multiplying by 1/10. If I'm multiplying that number by 100th, I have to move the decimal point from where it's at. If it's not visible, it's at the end, 2 places to the left. If I take that same number and I multiply by 1,000th, I move it 3 places to the left. Get it? Got it? Good. Love y'all. Peace out. Be kind to one another.